So the other day I was making my monthly Patreon supporter bonus video, and this month I had decided that all my Patreon supporters could submit their best macro photos, and I would go through each and every one of them and give my feedback on those photos to help my Patreon supporters become better photographers. And there were photos submitted by around 30 people, and each person submitted between 1 and 5 photos. And I went through all of them and gave my criticism and my feedback. What surprised me a lot was one mistake that a big part of all my Patreon supporters did. And I did not expect this to be the big mistake at all. I expected something like bad compositions, bad lighting, focus in the wrong place, motion blur. Those were the kinds of mistakes I expected to see a lot of. But the big mistake that I saw such a big proportion of my Patreon supporters make was that their photos was just too low resolution. Many of the photos were beautiful, but I saw immediately that the resolution was only like 2 or 3 megapixels. The photos almost looked blurry in many cases. It is perfectly possible to get super high resolution, crisp photos with pretty much any camera, so it's not really the camera that is the problem. What you must first think about, obviously, is to not have an motion blur in your photo, use a fast enough shutter speed or a flash to freeze the action. And of course you should get the focus in the right place. Focus on the eyes of the insect, preferably. But very few of my Patreon supporters did any of these mistakes. The focus was good, they used fast shutter speeds or a flash, so there were no like motion blur or anything like that. What I think many of them did though was to crop a lot. Obviously, if you take a photo and only crop out a small portion of it, it will be low resolution, and in some cases too low resolution, so that it becomes an annoyance. And the reason many people crop, I think, is that still the most common macro lenses out there that people know about and that people buy are the one-time magnification macro lenses. Every major camera manufacturer has these lenses. They are usually 60, 90 or 100mm f2.8 lenses, and they go to one-time magnification. And the problem with this is that when you're photographing insects, as most macro photography enthusiasts do, then the insects are in most cases too small for one-time magnification. The insect will only cover like a small part of the frame, and then you will have to crop to make an interesting photo. So I think step 1 is to get more magnification for your macro rig. Either buy one of the macro lenses from Laowa that I talk so much about because they go to 2 times magnification, or apply a Raynox filter, a Raynox DCR 250, which costs around $70. That is a cheap and simple way to get more magnification on your regular one-time magnification macro lens. Or maybe use some extension tubes to get more magnification, or even a teleconverter. But this is important. Make sure that you get to around 2 times magnification, otherwise you will have to crop too much and that will lead to low resolution. The second reason I think many photos are too low resolution is that you handle the image files in the wrong way. To get the best possible resolution and results, I recommend you to always shoot in RAW and then import that into a program like Lightroom. And then whenever you're gonna give someone your photo, for example if you submit it to Photo Critique by Micael Widell, then you export it as a JPEG from the RAW file. And you should never ever re-export a JPEG as a JPEG, because the JPEG image format is lossy, which means that you lose some image information, some sharpness and some detail every time you export a JPEG. So if you would have a JPEG and then export it again as a new JPEG, you would lose image information, and each time you do this, the photo will just become lower and lower resolution and look worse and worse and worse. Maybe you have seen sometime that someone posts a funny thing on Instagram or on Facebook, a meme or something, and you can see that the image quality is really bad, and that is because a lot of people have saved the image and then re-exported this as a new JPEG and done this over and over again, maybe 10 or 20 times, and then the image quality in the end will just be extremely bad. So always shoot in RAW, always export a new JPEG every time you want to share the photo with someone. Or of course you could use a JPEG that you made, but it should be made from that raw file and not from another JPEG. And then always, of course, make sure to use a high image quality when you export as JPEG. Use at least 85% and you should be fine. What I usually do is I have two settings. I have one for 15 megabyte JPEGs if I want really super high quality, and then Lightroom automatically makes the photo as good as possible up to 15 megabytes of image size. And then I have a smaller one which is 5 megabyte JPEGs if I want to share it somewhere where it matters that the photo doesn't take too much space. And then Lightroom will do its best to make the best possible quality in a JPEG while keeping it below 5 megabytes. And that is usually enough for getting a really high quality photo. These social media companies like Facebook, Instagram and so on, they have really high costs for storing data and for sending it over the internet. So they do everything they can to make every image uploaded to, for example, Instagram as small as possible, and therefore they compress the images a lot. So you should never ever download a photo that you took from a social media site to share it onwards, because then you have already lost so much information in that photo. Always go back to the source, your raw file, and export the JPEG from there, and you will have excellent image quality. Another thing you must know is how to use the sharpening tools available to you. For example, in Lightroom, you can always play around with the sharpening slider, apply some more sharpening when needed. You can also look at the radius. If you have a very unsharp image, it can help to increase the radius, because then it will try to sharpen from a less sharp image. But as a default, keep the radius at 1.0, 1.1 or something like that. That will give you the best possible sharpness if the image is already pretty sharp. And of course you have sharpening tools in Photoshop and other image manipulation software as well. Make sure to use these when appropriate. For example, every time I post something on Instagram, I use Instagram's built-in sharpening tool as a last step before uploading the photo, and that always gives me that extra crispy look to the photos that can make a big difference in how someone who looks at them perceives them. When you use sharpening tools though, make sure to not go too far, because it can look weird and over sharpened, and also it usually increases the noise in the photo a lot when you sharpen it too much. So it always comes at a cost, and make sure to find a balance where the photo is sharp enough but not too noisy or not too weird looking. And finally, when you do macro photography, you must be aware of diffraction. If you shoot at a too small aperture at a high magnification, you will get softness in your photo due to diffraction. For example, if you shoot at 2 times magnification, I recommend that you never go smaller than f10 or f11 in aperture, and if you shoot at 1 time magnification, maybe never go smaller than f16. So for example, if you're doing macro photography at high magnification and shoot the photo at f22, you will almost certainly get softness in your photo due to diffraction. I hope you learned something today. Resolution matters, sharpness matters, and it can make or break the impression of one of your photographs when you share it on social media or elsewhere. So make sure to mind that and to care about that, and make sure to apply the tips that I gave you in this video. This is my latest Patreon bonus video. It is 1 hour of me critiquing many photos of my Patreon supporters. Another bonus video is this macro photography adventure to a nature reserve. I create a new Patreon exclusive bonus video every month, and for $5 per month you can get access to this growing archive of videos and sleep better at night knowing that you ensure the future of this YouTube channel. Sign up now at patreon.com/Micael Widell.